Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast.
Welcome back.
Today, our topic is what is your pain or symptom rule book?
Yeah, I like that because I think Tanner, most people have some sort of rule book that they follow that they've been developing over maybe the course of years that they've been in chronic pain.
Yeah, so we're really going to dive into understanding like what are the rules we apply to our chronic pain and symptoms.
Yeah.
But, a bit about us. We had a date night finally.
Yeah, we really wanted to update that because I know we've been talking about our struggles to have date night. We had a date night with our kids, which I think we mentioned that we were going to do, which did not go great. And then we had a date night without our kids and a babysitter, which was great.
It was. This is the first time our kids have been watched by someone that's not their grandparents or...
Yeah, and that's a big deal. We've never done that before. It was a bit, I was pretty anxious about it.
I know.
But it went really well.
It did.
Yeah.
We had a 3-hour date night.
Yeah. And I think the best part of it is we spent a lot of time because it was 3 hours. We couldn't come back early and we spent a lot of time roaming around in our car, but we were forced just to kind of hang out, which was really nice.
Yeah. It was great because we just had so much time to connect without kids around.
Yeah.
Which is a rarity in our house.
Mm-hmm.
So today, this is a 2-part podcast episode. Today, we're going to talk about what your pain or symptom rulebook is. We'll give you a bit of an activity at the end that everyone can practice.
Mm-hmm.
And the next episode, we're going to talk about how we can rewrite these rules and start to break them.
Yeah, totally. And we'll make sure we end off talking about why we might want to rewrite it.
Mm-hmm. So you're probably all wondering, what is a pain or symptom rulebook? The rulebook is made up of behaviors that we do or don't do because we believe it will reduce our chronic pain or symptoms.
Yeah.
And this rulebook for a lot of people is extensive.
Yes.
We don't even realize how long it's getting over time. But I think a lot of people eventually wake up one day after they've been in chronic pain or symptoms for so long, and their world is just so small.
Right.
That's what takes place, is their world just gets so small over time. And that's a really scary thing. Like, I remember when I was in chronic pain, how terrifying that was, that, my world had just shrunk so much.
Yeah. And I think that makes sense, Tanner, that the reason why the world becomes so small is that rule book, or is kind of limitations on things that people can or can't do.
Mm-hmm.
For you then, if you think back to kind of your time, do you have a rule book that stands out for you?
Yeah, I was reflecting on this. I wrote some of them down, and there were so many rules.
Yeah.
And now it's been so long that I forget some of the little things that I would do. But I remember a big one that when I went to physios, chiros, that was really hammered into me, like, you got to do this, is stretching.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's actually a common one. Like, I'm sure stretching comes to mind for a lot of people.
Yeah. But I had this detailed stretching routine. Like, it was probably 30 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
And stretching is nice. Like, I do yoga. Like, this is enjoyable now. But again, like, the belief was I need to stretch to get out of chronic pain and symptoms. And so it was something I was doing to try and reduce my pain or symptoms or make them go away.
Okay. So when we think about rule book, is things that kind of become a part of that rule book, things that we're doing, is maybe out of avoidance or fear or controlling the symptoms. And so for you, stretching was something about that.
Yeah. And now it's very different because I like to stretch.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it to make sure I'm never in chronic pain again. I enjoy it. I enjoy the sensations. I enjoy breathing deeply as I do this. It's something that's a nice part of my day, that's for sure. Anne's like constantly seeing me stretch.
That's true.
Our kids are watching, but otherwise I'm just watching our kids' TV shows. Like, I got to do something.
No, that's fair. But I think it's complicated because, like you said, you were told as you're like going through your journey and you're kind of involved in the system, say, of different professionals, you're being told, hey, you need to stretch. So it makes sense that you're like, okay, I must do this. It's part of like my daily rule book that I do these stretches.
And people get so intense about their rule book, and that actually worsens it because it worsens like the state of fear that we're in as we're engaging in all these things, trying to force our symptoms to go away.
Yeah.
No, another really nasty one for me, I don't know if you remember this, is diet. Like
oh God, of course I remember this.
remember
What do
this?
you mean? Tanner's diet like ruled our lives for a long time.
It did. And and it came about innocently enough. Like some physios would mention it to me. I did all this like research and reading online. So gluten was the first one to go.
Yeah. And you were gluten-free for like a number of years.
Yeah. Even after I was out of pain. That was a rule that took me a while.
Oh, yeah.
But the gluten wasn't as bad as like the paleo diet. So the paleo diet, for people who don't know, we had so many paleo cookbooks. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I do. And actually, the paleo diet is like pretty good food. It's not a bad way.
Yeah.
Like none of these are bad ways of living. We really want to showcase that. Yeah. But for Tanner, it became, again, like the stretching. I must do this or my pain will be there or my pain will return. So it's not that these rules are bad. It's more that the motivation behind them is what we're talking about.
Yeah. And so I just ate this strict paleo diet of basically just meat and vegetables. And there was such intensity and fear.
Yes.
Like when I had to go out to eat.
Yes.
Or I had to, go to my parents' house for Christmas or Thanksgiving. There was such fear of I'm going to eat wrong and all my symptoms are going to come back.
Yeah. And I hear that a lot from people. Like it is a common belief. And for some people, for sure, it's something that needs to stay in place depending on what they're dealing with. But it's this common belief that if I eat this or don't eat this or regulate foods, my pain, it'll impact my pain.
And the last one I want to talk about of, part of the do's of my rule book was the chairs.
Yes.
The chairs were intense. Like the chair that I'm sitting on right now, it kind of has like this metal open space backing. That would have been my nightmare.
Right.
There is no way I'd be sitting in this chair. And I had this straight back chair and I had a towel rolled under my back and that's how I sat.
I remember that. Yeah.
And there was this fear of like, if I sit on unsupportive furniture or sit on a couch or anything of this nature, my back's curled slightly, like my pain's going to escalate.
Well, and it makes sense. Like it makes sense why these started to happen for you, Tanner, because you started to experience pain when you were sitting on other chairs. So it wasn't just kind of like out there for you.
No.
There was that association with pain. And so I think it makes it makes a lot of sense of why people might navigate to having these kind of rules because no one wants to be in pain all day. Like
exactly.
It's really important to validate that.
Yeah. Other things were things I wouldn't do. Things that I would avoid. I know we've kind of talked about this a bit. Yeah. But especially movement for me.
Yeah.
I just shrank it down more and more. Things I avoided, like don't walk more than 5 minutes. Don't walk on uneven terrain. Like I had this real belief of like I need to walk on like a paved path, a sidewalk, never on grass. And that's what I mean is all these little rules started to add up. So it's thinking about like what do you do or what do you not do because of your chronic pain and symptoms.
Yeah.
And that's the rule book. We have this intense set of rules, but there's such a downside when it comes to these things.
Yeah.
And when we talk about the downside of the rule book is first off, the rules are most of the time not correct.
Well, why do you say that? Because I think like I mentioned before, a lot of people create the rule book because they notice if I do this, I have pain. And so I think often we think it is correct of like,
we do.
It's connected.
Yeah. But your brain's going to produce pain or symptoms when it expects pain or symptoms.
So that association.
Yes. And so you get these conditioned responses taking place.
Yeah.
So people think their rules are right. And it would happen to me too. I would accidentally eat gluten and all of a sudden be in intense pain for 2 days.
Right.
But I've learned over time it wasn't actually the gluten. It's just my brain learned, if these conditions aren't met, you're in danger. If you do
Ah,
these things or don't do certain things, like you're going to be
yeah.
in danger, and then pain will be produced.
Well, and back to that idea that it becomes really complicated if people are telling us to do these things or we should do these things.
Yeah.
And because it's that extra voice in the back of our heads.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, talk to certain medical professionals, and there's this fearful language that's thrown out.
Yeah.
It really bothers me, to be honest. Like when I think back, like some
What was it for you? Like,
practitioners,
do you remember some of that
yeah,
fearful language?
I know I've said it on the podcast before, but I had I think he was a sports medicine doctor, and he basically told me I had hypersensitive nerves and you're going to be in pain the rest of your life.
Right.
Like, this is what I mean, is like that was not helpful for me to hear.
Yeah.
And also was not correct.
Did you feel like after hearing that, Tanner, that you had to like be careful with your body?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, it's basically, I was told I need to be fearful, essentially, and to be incredibly careful and manage things.
Right.
And it just added to my rule book. And we just want to be cautious here because most of the rules are incorrect. And the reason I say that is because a lot of chronic pain, a significant portion of chronic pain, is neuroplastic or a mind-body issue.
Yeah.
Meaning that it's due to your brain and nervous system being stuck in this state of survival. Yeah. A state of fear. I know when I say state of survival, some people are confused by that, but like a state of fear, whether it's like fight or flight, anger, frustration, anxiety. Yeah. It could also be more of like a free shutdown where we're in despair, we're shut down, we're numb, we're dissociative. And that is responsible for a lot of chronic pain and symptoms. And so all these rules we have about movement, diet, certain conditions aren't actually correct. And that's why the rule book's not actually helpful. But the other downside is that it limits our freedom.
Right. Because it's like we can only do this, we can't do that. And that becomes part of like the daily structure.
Yeah. And a lot of people get to this shut down, despair, hopeless state. Yeah. Because the freedom is so limiting. Like by the end, I wouldn't leave my house. Like I couldn't sit on couches even to watch TV. Yeah. Like there was the set of rules I had made my life so tiny.
Well, I think it like really increased fear for you.
It did.
Because the more you avoided things, it reinforced this idea of you can't do those things.
Yes.
And it kept that really growing for you.
Yeah. And if people want to widen their world, we're going to talk about this next episode in part 2. Yeah. But we have to start breaking those rules. Yeah. There has to be a willingness to start to rewrite those rules.
Well, and I think part of that is asking why, like really thinking about what are the rules that I have, how did they come about, and why am I following them? Like really reflecting on them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that what you said a moment ago, I was thinking about too, and in the sense that one of the downside to the rule book is it keeps you in this constant fear state. Yeah. Like we just talked about, like fight, flight, freeze, shutdown. It keeps you in this constant fear state. Yeah. Because then we're always on edge. We're always scanning. We're intensely making sure our day is structured exactly right.
And I it's funny you say that, Tanner, because I remember that as like a partner and a loved one. Also always feeling on edge because I was also accommodating your rule book. Like I knew what you could and couldn't do. I knew what you could and couldn't eat. I would feel on eggshells too a little bit in terms of like not messing up one of the rules. And so I think that put our household a bit, both of us on edge.
Yeah. And the most important thing that people understand about the downside of the rule book is it will continue to trigger and perpetuate your chronic pain and symptoms.
How does it do that? Why do you say that?
Well, it keeps us in a state of fear. Yeah. And, pain and physical symptoms are danger signals being sent by the brain. And so if we're always on edge, we're always perfectly trying to control our life, we're always in a state of fear, the brain feels a sense of danger constantly. Yeah. And it's going to produce more chronic pain and symptoms. The other thing that happens with the rule book is the brain starts to learn that there must be something wrong with the body.
Right.
Because
we're being so careful. We're so fragile.
I was treating myself as if I was 120 years old and incredibly
Mm.
fragile, and my bones were going to break at any moment.
Mhm.
Like, that's how I was going about living life.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about the rule book, is that as your life gets smaller and you avoid more, it actually continuously sends messages to the brain. Their body must be damaged. Their body must be damaged. And then it keeps producing chronic pain and symptoms.
Mm-hmm. And to heal from chronic pain and symptoms, that's exactly what we want to shift, is that kind of messaging.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be really subtle, because we can think we're shifting that, but that rule book can be so ingrained in like operating and belief system and daily structure.
And you're hitting on a really good point here, and we're going to give people an activity at the end here around rule books.
Yeah.
But you're hitting on a good point that a lot of this becomes unconscious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the activity we're going to talk about at the end here of like really starting to understand your rule book. Don't just assume you know, because there was things that I was doing that I was not even aware I was doing ananymore.
Did you have an example of one of those things that like came to light that you almost like surprised yourself by?
Yeah. So lots of people can't see me do this unless you're watching on YouTube. But one thing I did with my shoulder, so my left shoulder, is I do this like all day.
Oh gosh.
You remember this, right?
I'm like, it's like flashback. Yeah.
If you can't see what I'm doing is I'm like snapping my arm forward to click my shoulder.
Yeah. I remember. Why would you do that?
I don't even know how it came about. Like I thought maybe I was like, because it would click. It clicks now. And I thought that basically like waving my arm forward was somehow loosening my arm and loosening nerves.
Were you told to do that at any point?
No one told me to do this.
Like
this was
started
me.
Doing it. Okay.
Yeah. This was all me. So like, I mean, I would do this like 200 times a day. And even now, 10 years later almost, I still every once in a while do it. And I'm like...
Okay. Well, this is really interesting. When you were doing this, Tanner, and like moving your arm in this way, in the moment, what was it doing for you?
I think it was, I somehow felt a little bit safer.
Yeah.
But I think what was happening is each time I would snap my arm forward and push my hand forward, I was reminding my brain, oh, you're not safe. You're not safe. Because like there's something wrong with the body and I'm clicking my arm to try and make it go away.
Well, and that's something to think about with the rule book or things we do of like, okay, in the moment, it's kind of this trick of making you feel safe, but actually it's doing the opposite.
It's a trap.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a big way to look at some of these things.
Yeah, because if I could eat perfectly paleo, just meat and vegetables, I was in my own little world and there was some sense of safety, but it was actually trapping me.
Yes.
It was reminding my brain, oh, like his diet needs to be perfect or else.
Yes. And I remember like at the times when your diet wasn't perfect or something would go wrong, the panic response that would happen.
Yeah.
And then the pain that would happen. So it was like almost a self-fulfilling type of prophecy.
And that's why next episode, part 2, we're going to talk about breaking these rules.
For you, Tanner, when did you start to kind of become aware of this for yourself?
Yeah, I think it was shortly after I started to read some of Dr. Sarno's books, Dr. Schubiner's book. Like I had some awareness of this.
Yeah.
And I started to write them down.
Okay.
Because, and I want to talk about this in a second, but the awareness is first. That's the key. And so, the first step that I want everyone to listening to do is spend some time writing this down. Write out your pain or symptom rule book. Write down everything you do or don't do because you believe it's reducing your pain or symptoms.
Can that include like stuff that you've been told by professionals?
Yes. Yeah. It's just, we're not, and again, this is optional. No one has to do this, but starting to write some of this down is key because we need to understand this package of beliefs, this package of rules that's taking place. And
writing it down is an extra step, but it really helps us to look at what we're kind of thinking about. So we encourage to do the writing.
Yeah. And get detailed about it. Like we said, a lot of this is probably unconscious for people. So get detailed about it. And just observe. That's how I realized the shoulder thing. Because at first I knew why I was doing it.
Yeah.
But over a number of years, me snapping my shoulder forward over and over again just became automatic.
Yes.
And it was something I realized. I was like, why am I doing this like 100 times a day? Like, and so like, write this down, observe how you function throughout your day and all the little things you're doing because you think it's going to reduce your symptoms. I would spend, maybe 10 minutes doing this at once, but then throughout the day, jot down little notes.
Yeah. No, and I think this is a really great idea because it forces to question things a little bit.
Yeah.
But even this activity of like writing it down can be really scary because it can be like, oh, I'm thinking about this differently, or I'm bringing it into my awareness, because I know when we have a rule book for whatever reason, we hold on to that really tightly.
We do. And so it just helps us lay out, what's the work we might need to do in the future. And that can be a scary aspect, but it gives you a lay of the land.
Totally. And the highlight, just because you're questioning the rule book doesn't mean you have to change everything in that rule book.
No. So. Like I said, and not necessarily all the rules need to be changed either to recover. Like not eating gluten. I did that for, I can't remember how long, 2 or 3 years after I was out of pain.
Yeah.
And I was out of pain. That was a rule I didn't break, but I did break a significant portion of the rules to get to a pain-free place.
Yeah.
And so next week, we're going to continue this episode and we're going to talk about how you can rewrite the rules.
Yes. Yes.
And we're going to discuss an important element of this of like breaking condition responses.
Yeah, totally. So it starts with building that awareness, having a bit of open mind to like, okay, do I need this rule? Is it actually making my pain worse, even though I don't realize it? What's it doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks for listening.
And we will talk to you all next week.
Talk to you next week.